All right, if you're like most people moving to the Oregon coast, you're looking for the peace and the quiet and the tranquility that the Oregon coast offers. The ocean, the beaches, the natural beauty, not a busy, bustling area. In fact, most people are escaping a busier area to be in a more quiet and peaceful place. Now, the Oregon coast has about a half a dozen larger towns with 10,000 plus people. These are going to be areas that are really heavy on tourism, especially at certain times of the year, can be really, really busy, but also the neighborhoods within these cities in the city limits tend to be really dense, a lot of beach houses and cottages and things like that, which is great in and of itself, but there are a series of Oregon coast villages that we don't really get to highlight all that often. And in this video, we're going to talk about these Oregon coast villages that I think really are going to be what people envision when they think about moving to the Oregon coast. Stay tuned to learn more. Hey, what's up everybody? This is Clem with the Oregon Relocation Team, licensed broker with eXp Realty in Oregon and in Washington. And in this video, we're going to talk about the villages on the Oregon coast. Now, these are not even towns. These aren't incorporated cities. They don't have a city council, a mayor, they don't have a ton of infrastructure, they hardly have stoplights. In fact, all of the towns in this video that we're going to highlight don't even have stoplights. Some don't have a grocery store, many don't have any commercial businesses at all. So why would somebody choose to live in an area like this? Well, these villages on the Oregon coast are going to be a lot less busy, a lot quieter. Now, there's going to be a heavy tourism element anywhere on the Oregon coast. So a lot of the villages we're going to talk about in this video do have second homes, vacation homes, things like that. That is something you cannot get away from on the Oregon coast, no matter how hard you try. And these are areas that are often a bedroom community of a larger town. So a big concern that people have moving to the Oregon coast is, are there going to be enough services and amenities to support what I want and need day to day? In particular, a hospital, grocery stores, a gym, things like that, where in all of these areas that we're going to talk about, virtually none of that exists. So you would find yourself traveling to the next largest town north or south to do your grocery shopping, to go to the gym, whatever it may be. So whether you are relocating to the Oregon coast full time or looking for a vacation home or a second home or potentially even an investment to use as a short-term rental, there are a series of villages on the Oregon coast that really fit the bill, I think, that really fit what people envision when they think about an Oregon coast community. So these are typically going to be pretty dense little communities, a true beach town feel. You know, you get the exposed cedar shake, a lot of cottages, kind of Cape Cod style cottages. In some ways you get like a Martha's Vineyard type feel, type vibe to it. Some of it, or a lot of it, tends to feel a little bit more upscale. Even in areas where you have a high volume of smaller cottages, smaller homes, these aren't necessarily going to be the most affordable areas on the Oregon coast. Now, if this is your first time to the channel, or you've been here and you haven't already and you want to get more videos like this, make sure to hit the subscribe button and tap the little bell to get notified every time we drop a new video. All right, let's jump right into it. So in true living on the Oregon coast fashion, we're just going to go north to south, talking about some of these villages. There are some that were left off the list, so if you want to learn more about some other areas that are similar to the type of areas that we're talking about in this video, if you are thinking about moving to the Oregon coast and you want to talk more about what that process looks like, give us a call, send us a text, shoot us an email, or click the link down below in the description of the video, schedule a Zoom call with us, and we can really dig into a lot of these areas a lot more. All right, the first area we're going to talk about is Arch Cape. So you've probably heard us talk about Arch Cape in other videos, and it's usually preceded by its reputation of being the most expensive area on the Oregon coast. So this is an unincorporated area. Like all of these areas on this list, there's no city council, it's unincorporated. But in the case of Arch Cape, you're looking at a median sale price typically around $1 million. So there's only 250 people who live here, but there's definitely an upscale feel to it, although it's not like, you know, the hillside is speckled with big mansions necessarily. I think it's a exclusive community. It's very dense. You know, the streets are, there's a lot of unpaved streets and potholes and things like that. So it's not an overly developed area by any means, but you are right by Hug Point State Park. There are other state parks in the area, and you are bookended by probably two of the nicest towns on the Oregon coast. I think when you ask most people what the nicest town on the Oregon coast is, they're going to say Cannon Beach, which is just north of Arch Cape, but Manzanita is right there. Manzanita is a very similar community to Cannon Beach. It's less busy, there's less restaurants, there's less shops, things like that, but it really has a very similar feel to Cannon Beach, and Manzanita is just south of Arch Cape. So if you're living in Arch Cape, you're going to be in Manzanita, you're going to be in Cannon Beach very often, going out to dinner, going out to shops, or enjoying the beaches in those areas. But the beach access around Arch Cape is much more private. There is public access, and there's no private beaches in Oregon. All the beaches in Oregon are public, but you're not going to get the volume of people stopping and frequenting the beaches here in this area like you would in a Cannon Beach or in a Manzanita, or really in most of the towns on the Oregon coast. So at first glance, Arch Cape, it might be a little bit of a head scratcher as to why this is the most expensive area on the coast, but when you zoom out a little bit, see what's around it, when you look at kind of the privacy, the exclusivity that it seems to have, it starts to make a lot more sense, and it's going to be really close to Portland too. So a lot of people from Portland are going to have vacation homes, second homes here in this area as well. That's going to be something that, like a lot of these villages on the Oregon coast, really props up the real estate value. One negative about Arch Cape is that you're really not very close to a large town, or what would consider to be a large town for the Oregon coast. So for more of your shopping and things that you might need from time to time or day to day, you're going to have to travel all the way north to Seaside or all the way south to Tillamook, which is a farther distance than a lot of these other villages have to the next larger town. So again, you have Cannon Beach and Manzanita, but those are really small towns too, in and of themselves. So in Arch Cape, you do have to do a little more traveling north or south to potentially access some of the services or amenities that you might need or want. All right, next we'll talk about Nadana Beach. So this is a little community just north of Rockaway Beach. It really is considered to be Rockaway Beach. This one is a little bit fringe in that a lot of the villages that we're talking about on this list are pretty removed from the larger town. Rockaway Beach in and of itself is relatively small, but it's definitely a big developed area. It's definitely a bigger beach town, with kind of a main street and main drag and shops and restaurants and things like that, and a lot of homes, whereas Nadana, just north of Rockaway Beach, is a very enclosed, very private little community. There's like one way in and one way out. I think on Beach Street, when you pass Neocani High School, you just go west from the highway, and there's probably a couple hundred homes there, maybe 300-400 homes max. The population isn't even listed on the census for Nadana Beach, but this really has that little village feel. And I think one thing that's really great about Nadana Beach is that it's a lot newer. So it's very cohesive, although some of these villages that have been developed over the last 100+ years, there's a lot of character. You have a lot of really old beach homes, which is kind of cool to see. There's some history there. This area in Nadana Beach has been developed over the last 30 years, let's say. So again, it's very cohesive, it's very clean. You have wider streets, there's a lot of consistency from house to house. The beach access is phenomenal there, and it's going to be pretty private there too. So the people accessing the beach right there, in Nadana, are going to be probably people staying or living in that particular area. It does tend to get a little busy, a little crowded in the warmer months, but overall it's not going to be completely overrun like beaches that you would access like in Lincoln City, for example, or even just right there south in Rockaway Beach. Similarly here, your next big town is going to be Tillamook, but you're going to be a little bit closer to Tillamook than you would be, say, if you were up in Arch Cape. So if you need to get down to the grocery store, it's going to be more like, let's say, 30 minutes to get down to Tillamook, which isn't all that bad. So you do have some accessibility. There's a grocery store in Rockaway Beach too, so it's not too terribly isolated. I would say one thing about Nadana, I don't know the exact elevation of the area, but it feels like you're right at sea level. So you kind of have this dune that separates the ocean from the community. So when you get to the beach access, you have to walk a little bit to get to the open beach. The area itself is very flat and seems to be pretty low elevation. So this is an area that might be at a higher risk for flooding. I don't know if it's in a 50-year or 100-year flood zone necessarily, but this is an area that seems more susceptible to, a tsunami or flooding, for example. All right, the next area we'll talk about is Oceanside and Netarts. So these are two separate communities that really are kind of one. They are west of Tillamook, up and over Cape Meares, so they're very private and very removed from Tillamook, whereas Tillamook doesn't feel like a coastal town necessarily. You do have the bay right there. You get up and over the hill to Netarts and then into Oceanside, It is incredible. The landscape, the natural beauty there, the views are really unparalleled on the Oregon coast. This is an area that feels like a European coastal town to some degree. It feels like Cinque Terre. I mean, not quite. I mean, Oceanside, Oregon is not Cinque Terre in Italy by any stretch of the imagination, but it has that feel to it where you have this immediate elevation from the beach and all these homes towering over the beach. It has a really unique feel in that way where you can't really get that anywhere else on the Oregon coast. Maybe Yachats to some degree, but Oceanside and Netarts are going to be much more private because you have that separation. So Highway 101 isn't going straight through there. You don't get the through traffic like you do. It is a relatively busy area because it is super accessible from Portland. So people drive out to Oceanside for the afternoon, go to the beach, that kind of thing. So you do get a lot of people in and out of there. There's a lot of vacation homes and Airbnbs and things like that in this area, but there's a couple little restaurants. I mean, that's about it. There's not a ton there. Now down in Netarts, you do have a little grocery store. There's like at least one little dive bar. There's a great restaurant in Netarts called The Schooner, which is, right down on the water. And there's only about 1,000 people that live in this area. So Netarts has about 600 people and Oceanside has about 400 people. So it's a smaller, less populated area, very private, very beautiful. And you're only 10 minutes or so from Tillamook. So Tillamook has your grocery stores and things that you would need more day to day. If you need to get to the gym, there's a hospital there. So if you're living in Netarts or Oceanside, Tillamook is just down the street. It's very easy, very simple to access, but you feel like you're 100 miles away because of how different these communities are. So one negative I would say about, this isn't Netarts necessarily, but in Oceanside, you drop cell service. There's no cell signal in Oceanside. Now there's internet service, you can get Wi-Fi at home, so you can work or, communicate, but if you're out on a walk, if you're down on the beach, you're not going to get cell service in Oceanside. So that comes as a shock to a lot of people. It's frankly kind of surprising that they don't have a cell tower there to offer cell service in this day and age. But at any rate, that certainly is a negative when you are looking into this area. All right, the next area we'll talk about is Sand Lake and specifically Tierra del Mar. So there is a stretch of highway going from Oceanside and Netarts, where we were just talking about, that follows the coastline straight down to Pacific City. If you were to stay on Highway 101, you would veer off from the coastline quite a bit before you get back down to Pacific City. So this is a really private, uninterrupted stretch, undeveloped stretch of area that has a ton of great hiking, a ton of natural beauty. You have Netarts Bay there on the north, but then you have like Cape Lookout. There's a lot of hiking around there in that area. You're going to get far less day trippers, so people driving out from Portland or Salem to just go to the beach for the afternoon or even the weekend. So this area is going to be a lot quieter and a lot more laid back than even some of the really small villages that we're talking about in this video. This is another area where the population is unknown because it's not part of the census, but at any rate, it really fits that bill where you have a few streets of residential area that's pretty dense, beach homes and cottages of a certain style, and this is going to be really pretty close to Pacific City. So I think you can think of Tierra del Mar as a bedroom community or kind of a little neighborhood of Pacific City just to the south. And Pacific City is very small, not a ton of infrastructure. It's not very built out or developed. So Pacific City by itself is pretty small, but there is a grocery store and there's restaurants, and of course you have the legendary Pelican Brewery right there. And so there's going to be things to do, things that you can get out and do if you're living in Tierra del Mar. But aside from that, there's not going to be any shops or restaurants or anything like that in this area. I think really the benefit here is it is pretty undiscovered, undeveloped, very private, very quiet, in an area where I think you can really get away from a lot of the tourism element that you get on the coast, in particular the northern Oregon coast. But there's also just less there overall. It is a little more removed in the way like Arch Cape isn't close to, one of these larger towns, one of these half a dozen or so larger towns on the Oregon coast. Tierra del Mar is also going to be, very inaccessible, or rather the larger towns north or south are going to be less accessible. So you'd have to get all the way down to like a Lincoln City to be your next largest town, aside from Pacific City. All right, next we'll talk about Neskowin. And Neskowin is probably the most idyllic Oregon coast village. in my opinion. It really has it all as far as, again, what you might envision when you think about a little coastal community. There's one little general store, there's one little restaurant, but aside from that, it's just this stretch of residential development. There's 177 people that live there. There's a golf course, I think it's a 9-hole golf course. You're surrounded by mountains and capes and headlands, and so you have this elevation, up above you, and kind of, this flat area where the residential development is. You're pretty isolated here, but Lincoln City is only 15 minutes or so south on Highway 101, and Nesquin is right on Highway 101, so the access getting in and out of the area and getting down to Lincoln City is great. Lincoln City has, well over 10,000 people, so this is a pretty populated area, a population center for the Central Oregon coast. And one of the grocery stores, Safeway, is on the kind of the farthest north side of Lincoln City. So getting there from Nesquin is actually really going to be pretty simple. But the landscape, the beauty here is unmatched. The style of home, the age of home, this is where you get a lot of the older cottages. Just feels like there's a lot of history there. You have Proposal Rock. You have the Ghost Forest that a lot of people come out and see. It's a really photographed area. On the south side of the village, near the store and the restaurant, you have a condo building. So you have some different options there where you could actually get into a condo in this area. But I think really the big draw are these true Oregon coast beach cottages that you can get in Nesquin. And you look north up the coast, south down the coast, and kind of in any direction, it just feels very, very private. So this is an area that I think would be attractive to a lot of people. This is an area that is relatively unknown to a lot of people looking from the outside in. But this is an area that for sure is most representative of what these Oregon coast villages are really like. All right, next we'll talk about Lincoln Beach. So this is an area that's actually 3 communities. It's a little bit larger. It's actually by far the largest village or area that we're talking about on this list, but it has that less developed, less busy feel that you get even in a village of a couple hundred people, like in Nesquin, for example. In fact, Lincoln Beach, this area feels, like a larger version of Arch Cape or Nesquin, because it's this stretch of beachfront development, mostly all west of Highway 101, where just about anywhere you are in this area, you have an ocean view. You have really quick, easy beach access where you can walk to the beach in 5 minutes. That's a relatively rare thing to get on the Oregon coast. And when you look at Lincoln Beach, it's actually a relatively affordable area too when you look at the pricing relative to what you get. So again, it feels a lot like Arch Cape, median sale price, like close to $1 million. That's not going to be the case in Lincoln Beach. So again, this is comprised of 3 different communities, but it's really all kind of 2 separate areas. You have Salishan, which is a gated HOA community, which is kind of up into a hill and some trees and more of a wooded area. You have a golf course there, and then it goes along the Salishan Spit right on the Siletz Bay. So the Siletz Bay is north of this Lincoln Beach area, separating Lincoln City from Lincoln Beach. So this is unincorporated Lincoln County, but it's probably more a neighborhood or bedroom community of Lincoln City than not, because you're just separated by the bay there. But Lincoln City is just up the street, so anything you would need, Lincoln City is right there. But you're also very removed, much more private than anything you would get in Lincoln City proper. So Glen Eden Beach is an area that you'll see on the map. This is included in this area. There's about 2,800 people who live here between Salishan, Glen Eden Beach, and Lincoln Beach. And it's just this long, continuous stretch of oceanfront development. It's pretty dense. You get all the exposed cedar shake. You get the true Oregon coast beach homes here. But again, it's a larger area with more people. There's, I believe, 1 grocery store. There's a couple other one-off shops and things like that along Highway 101. I don't think there's not even a gas station right there along Highway 101. You would have to get down into Depot Bay or north up into Lincoln City. But you do have the 1 grocery store. But again, Lincoln City is so close to the north that you can just shoot up the highway to get anything that you would need. All right, next we'll talk about Otter Rock, still in Lincoln County on the Central Oregon coast. This is a really undiscovered, unexplored area where you have a road that jets off west from Highway 101. If you stay on Highway 101, you go right past it. You would not know what Otter Rock is or what it looks like or what's over in that area. So you have this headland where, again, if you go off of Highway 101 over into this Otter Rock community, you get into a residential area which really has that coastal village feel. About half of it is a big timeshare resort community, but there's like a Moe's there, which is probably overrated, but a chain of seafood restaurants up and down the Oregon coast. You have coffee shops, again, a couple restaurants, things like that in this area that is super private and really removed from the highway. So whereas even like Anescoin is right on Highway 101, Otter Rock, you go off and you are completely separated from the highway. So it has that privacy element that some of these areas have, but not all of them do. There's only about 255 people who live here. This is an area that is north of Newport, south of Depot Bay, so you could get up into Depot Bay, but Depot Bay is very small and doesn't really have much to offer necessarily in terms of day-to-day needs, things that you would need. Newport is a much larger town, about the same size as Lincoln City, 10,000 plus people. Newport is a great community, probably top 2, top 3 busiest tourism towns on the Oregon coast. You know, you have like Seaside, Newport, Astoria, Cannon Beach. You know, there's certain towns that really are the top destinations for tourism. Newport is definitely in that mix. You have the aquarium, you have the Wax Museum, you have the Aquinnah Bayfront, you have Nye Beach. There's a lot to offer there. So if you're living up in Otter Rock, you can get down into Newport pretty easily. I mean, it might be 15 minutes to get just about anywhere you would want to get to in Newport living in Otter Rock. But this is an area, like most on this list, that, you know, can be a little more isolated, not going to offer much in your immediate vicinity necessarily. So that tends to be the trade-off with a lot of these areas. All right, next we have an area called Seal Rock. So Seal Rock is south of Newport, south of South Beach, which is kind of a community connected to Newport, and it is north of Waldport. So you have these relatively large towns, Newport in particular, to the north and to the south, and it's an unincorporated community. There's about 1,200 people here, so this is not the smallest on this list by any means. There's a higher volume of restaurants and galleries and things like that here in this area than in just about any of these coastal villages that we're talking about, but it has that kind of undeveloped feel to it that you get in a lot of these areas, where it's not going to be overrun with tourism, it's not going to be overrun with traffic and things like that. It feels a lot like Lincoln Beach, that Glen Eden Beach area just south of Lincoln City, except most all of the residential development is east of the highway. So you're not getting nearly the opportunity that you get for ocean views or even beach access to some degree. So there are some trade-offs here, but it is quiet, it's private. Again, you're next to or adjacent to more populated areas, so you know, you're not completely isolated in that way. But overall, it has a little bit of a different feel, even just being east of the highway. Really, anything east of the highway, as a rule of thumb, is going to have a little bit of a different feel. In some cases, even a different climate than if you're west of the highway and right on the ocean. All right, next is Dunes City. So Dunes City is going to be the most unique village that we'll talk about in this video. It's actually going to be the only incorporated city that we'll talk about in this video, but there's no stoplights, you're in the trees, it's very private. There's no restaurants or development. I mean, there's a little bit on Highway 101, like a gas station, but that might even be up into Florence and might not even be in the Dune City limits. So Dune City has about 1,400 people, so it's certainly not the smallest area that we've talked about, but it is very private. This is a very wooded area. This isn't an area where you're going to get a ton of people in and out necessarily, aside from people accessing the lakes. So you have Wohink Lake and Siltcoos Lake, which are these big lakes in Dune City, and Dune City is lakefront living. So we've been talking about beachfront, oceanfront, coastal villages. Dune City is east of the highway and it's lakefront living, but you are just south of Florence, so you are really close to one of the larger towns, one of the more popular towns on the Oregon coast, which is just west of Eugene, but you are south of the river. So once you cross the bridge and go south of the river in Florence, you get into the trees, into the woods, you go maybe another 7 or 8 miles south, and you go left into Dune City, which is this residential community surrounding these two lakes here. So a little bit of a different climate. You can be a little warmer, a little colder depending on the time of year than even just on the west side of the highway on the ocean. Like I was talking about, the climate really can change, you know, depending on how far away from the ocean you are. I think one of the reasons I wanted to bring this one up is because it really does fit the mold as far as being private and quiet and removed from a larger town, but it's also called Dunes City. So this is a stretch of the Oregon coast where you have a ton of dunes, and west of the highway and out to the ocean, you have these big dunes, which, you know, people go four-wheeling and ATVs, dune buggies, things like that. But Dune City itself is in the forest, on these two lakes. So Dune City is next to the dunes on the other side of the highway, but there's no dunes in Dune City, so I think that's at least important to mention. All right, so most everything we've talked about up to this point has been central Oregon coast and northern Oregon coast, where you find a higher volume of these types of villages. You're closer to the more populated areas in Oregon, where more people are going to have second homes or vacation homes, or visit the Oregon coast for the weekend, that type of thing. As you work your way south, it gets less dense, it gets more spread out, it gets more isolated to some degree. And you do have some communities that we're not necessarily touching on in this video, like Charleston and Barview and Langlois, but it's not until you get all the way into Curry County into Nasika Beach, which is 8 miles north of Gold Beach, where you get a community that feels like a lot of the areas that we're talking about in this video. It's much more open, it's very flat, it is really right there on the beach. You have sweeping panoramic views of the ocean, north up the coastline, south down the coastline. I mean, this is one of the most beautiful areas on the Oregon coast, the southern Oregon coast really as a whole. Gorgeous, incredible landscape. In Nasika Beach, it seems like you do have larger homes on average, so it's still pretty dense, but a lot of the areas that we've talked about, it's a little more wooded. You have these coastal trees, you have these cottages that are just kind of packed into these residential areas. In Nasika Beach, there's really like no trees overhead. You have bigger homes that are still, again, in there in a pretty dense fashion, but it does feel more upscale in the way of, all of these homes being larger. It's a little bit newer than some of these areas that we're talking about in this video. It's going to be super windy, so I think just where you're situated right there, so close to the water, it's so flat, you don't have the trees or the headlands protecting you from the wind in this area. So every time I've been in this area, it's at least breezy, but the wind can really be ripping here. So that is definitely going to be a negative, but this is, again, a beautiful area. This is an area that a lot of people really gravitate toward because it has this beachfront element, but you're close to town, 8 miles north of Gold Beach. Brookings is a little bit further south, maybe 30, 40 minutes, something like that from Nasika Beach. So, you do have access to things around you where you can get out, go to restaurants, but Nasika Beach in and of itself, again, no stoplight, not a ton of infrastructure. It's just a little unincorporated community there in Curry County. So if you are thinking about moving to the Oregon coast and you're looking for an area that is going to be consistent with some of the things that we're talking about in regards to these coastal villages, and if you want to talk more about what areas are going to meet your needs based on what you're looking for, give us a call, send us a text, shoot us an email, click the link down below in the description of the video, schedule a Zoom call with us, and we can talk more about it. Now, if this video is helpful, make sure to hit the like button. That helps us out a lot. If you want to get more videos like this, make sure to hit the subscribe button, tap the little bell to get notified every time we drop a new video. As always, we really appreciate you watching. Until next time, we'll talk to you later.